That's the project you can find attached to this lecture here. It allows us to define a server name here and then some content for the server. And then we can either add a server or a blueprint. And as you can see, both look pretty similar, but the server is bold and red or has some bold and red text. The blueprint has some italic blue text. So that's the difference here. Now, this app is all running in one component as of now, in the app component. Here in the template, we got a lot of code, and we can do better. We can split this up, because that's not ideal having all that logic in this component here. Maybe splitting it up makes sense, because that would also allow us, if we build a bigger app, to reuse parts of that. So how could we split this up? We could create a new component for this whole cockpit here, where we enter a name and content and click the buttons. And of course, we could also create a component for an individual server. And with that, we should have a much leaner app component HTML file, and we would bundle our business logic better into individual components. Now we learned how to create new components. I will use the CLI. You could of course also do it manually. And I will create new components with ng-g. And then let's say the first component could be this cockpit here. So I will simply name it cockpit component. Now as an addition, we can type --spec false to make sure this spec, this testing file, is not getting created. I deleted it all the time anyways. And then I will repeat this step for another new component, which I will simply name server element. Server element because it could either be a server or a blueprint in this example. So with that, we got two new folders in our app component. So two new components, thus far nothing you don't know. Now we can of course take our code here from the app component HTML file from this template. So for example, this first bootstrap row here, cut it here and add it to our cockpit like this. Now, of course, if we remove the template part here, we also have to remove, or we have to move the methods we're calling here. So on add server and on add blueprint. So in the TypeScript code here, I will copy both, or I will cut both elements here and move them over to our cockpit. And we will soon also come to ng-on init and what this does as a side note. Now, of course, my issue is that I try to push this to arrays or to an array which doesn't exist here. Server elements, that array is still in the app component. We could, of course, move that. Oh, and maybe I should also move that closing curly brace. We could, of course, move this server elements array, but then we would no longer have it in our app component, and we will need it there too, though. Because there, we still will need to replicate these server elements to create the, service we output here. So, as a first step, what I can move, of course, cut and paste, are the two properties which are used here with two-way binding. So I can move that to the cockpit, but we will have to see what we do about this server elements array. For now, let's go back to the app component HTML file and take a single server here, so this panel div here. So with that, all we have here now is the row and the column, and the other part will go into the HTML file of the server element, because that is a single server. Now here, of course, we have this loop, and that's not what I want to have in here, so I will get rid of it there, because I still want to manage my array of server elements in the app component, because we somehow need to be able to manipulate it from the cockpit and then replicate it in the app component to create multiple instances of this server element component, which is only a single server. Keep this in mind, this is not a list of servers. Now, of course, you could set this up differently, but this is the approach I will go with, and this approach won't work right now. We also try to access an element property now inside of our server element component, which we also don't have. So a couple of things to fix. I like the general way we split up our app, and that we now can add our app cockpit here, where we before had the full HTML code we moved over there, and that we can add our app server element component here, and that we could also replicate this with ng-for, let server element of server elements. So we can, of course, also place ng-for on a component, as you already learned before. So I like that. But I don't like that the app is broken, and if we have a look at it, that well, we simply get an error that a couple of properties are unknown. So we somehow, and that is a key part, need to get the new server we add in the cockpit to this array of servers in our app component. So we kind of need to inform our app component that one of its child components, the app cockpit, changed, or that something changed there to which we should react. A new server was added. And then we also need to get the data we got from the cockpit, so this new server, which is managed in this array of servers in the app component. We need to get the individual server of a single loop iteration here down to the app server element. So we need to pass data between components, and that of course is a super important task we haven't touched yet, but we will dive deeper into right now.